Welcome to fourth grade history. This is lesson 151. We're looking at pages 218 and 219, but stopping at the Korean War. And then for homework, you're going to study pages 213 to 218 to that comprehension check for a quiz in the next lesson. So tomorrow or whenever you have the next lesson. All right, so we are going to start by singing our presidents. We missed it a couple days, so we're going to start with that, and then we'll look at those pages. All right, so pages 256 and 257 if you need it, and then we'll sing that. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk and Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant and Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump was the next one. All right. Very good. If you'll turn back to 218, and I'm going to ask a couple questions. I'll ask the comprehension check there. What event caused the United States to enter World War II? Pearl Harbor was bombed on what date? December 7th, 1941. All right. And on which continent did the fighting stop first? Africa. Remember, because Italy was defeated, they were trying to invade Africa, and so that was where it stopped first. What do we call the day that the fighting stopped in Europe? VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. Okay. And what event caused the Japanese to surrender? An atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and on Nagasaki, and it destroyed both cities. All right, so the end of World War II, and everyone is hoping for peace, but they hoped that at the end of World War I. And so what could prevent another big world war from happening, a third world war? But, you know, remember at the end of World War I, there was President Woodrow Wilson planned the League of Nations, and to where the countries could talk out problems and a place where they could all come to agree. But when it was formed, pardon me, the United States did not take part in it. The people of the US didn't want to join with it because many have realized that not all countries who would be a part of this could be trusted, even if they promised to be friendly. We'd seen that with others. They had said, "Oh, we'll stop," or "We're nice," and then turn around and they attack, or they continue what they're doing. And so, not all countries are going to be true to their word. And so, that's why we didn't join the League of Nations. But President Franklin Roosevelt and other world leaders began to think of another organization, and they called it United Nations, the UN. And they were trying to solve the world's problems through science. And that's what President Roosevelt said. He said, using scientific methods, we can cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all peoples, all kinds to live together and work together in the same place at peace. And that sounds really good, except for science is not what brings peace. Nothing that man can come up with will bring peace. Roosevelt didn't understand that, and many others didn't understand it at this time. But he actually died before World War II ended. And if a president of the United States dies while in office, you may know this, but the vice president takes the place of the president. And at this point, it was Harry S. Truman. So he became the next president. So there's our United Nations, and Harry S. Truman was the next president because he was vice president when President Roosevelt died in office. And so he took control. But in 1945, representatives from 50 nations met in San Francisco, California, and formed the United Nations. But they failed to bring, and later a UN building was was built in New York City, sorry. But they didn't bring an end to world wars or wars, and they didn't bring world peace, because they couldn't. They really had, they didn't either. Their method of using science is not what brings peace. And so, unfortunately, between 1945 and 1990, there were over 75 wars that were fought all over the world, and they couldn't do anything to stop them. In fact, many believe that because of the spread of communism, that the United Nations actually kind of helped them, that communism spread. And maybe not as in they were actively saying, oh yes, let's spread communism, but more of a turning a blind eye to communism, and that not actually stopping it. And more than 40 million people were executed by communism, and over 1 billion people were enslaved. And that sounds just awful. Being from a free country where we believe that, we have the freedom to go to the store when we're not in quarantine, of course. But before this, it was, I could go to the store, I could travel to Rock Springs and back, and no one would stop me and say, hey, where are you going? But in a communist country, you just come out of your house and you might get stopped and asked where you're going and what you're doing, because you're not free to do just whatever you want. And so, even though at the end of World War II, we stopped the fascism in Italy, we stopped Nazism in Germany, and the militarism in Japan, we didn't stop the communism in the Soviet Union. And so in the Soviet Union, they spread in, they took hold of those weak countries that had been overtaken by Germany and were now trying to rebuild after that. They actually came in, and Stalin overtook these free European countries because they were weak. And so they went from Europe into Asia. China was now communist, and many small countries that had freedom were now terrified of being overtaken by communism. After World War II, the German city of Berlin was divided. And so East Berlin was communist and West Berlin was free. And because people kept going back or trying to flee East Berlin built a wall, and it's known as the Wall of Shame. And it wasn't a very tall wall, as some have seen, but if you were, they had guards posted, and if you went to climb over the wall, you would be shot. And so many people died because they tried to escape East Germany and weren't able to get out. But by 1990, the Soviet Union needed money, they wanted technology, and Free West Berlin had those things, so they took the wall down, and that, that did come from one of our presidents. It wasn't, I believe it was Ronald Reagan who said, who told the leader in Germany to tear down the wall. And so, but it was the countries over in Europe and Asia were not just, just because the war ended didn't mean that their problems were over. There were different things that happened, and this was one of them, was that there were cities divided, and there were countries that were overtaken by communism. And so we wanted, the world wanted peace, but peace is just something that we can't achieve. Only God can give true peace. And so that's the difficulties, because a lot of people don't understand that that's why we can't have peace. It's because not everybody knows Jesus as their savior. And if you do know him as your savior, then you have an inner peace. And you don't want to go out and steal from people and hurt people if you've got Christ at the center of your life. But many people don't, and they don't have this hope or this peace that only God can give. And so that's the unfortunate reality that we live in. And it's because we live in a sin-cursed world, because sin is all through our world. But take hope, because you can find that peace, that hope in God. And maybe you already have, but I pray that you do have that peace. And if you don't, that you will find that peace in God. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, then I'll let you go ahead and read this, and then you can study for the quiz that is in the next lesson. All right. What organization was formed to keep world peace? The United Nations, or the UN. And who took the office of president after Franklin Roosevelt died? Harry S. Truman. Okay. What was the government of the Soviet Union that spread its influence after World War II? Communism, right? And what German city was divided by communism after World War II? Berlin. If you were looking over my shoulder and can read it on the board, it was right there. But all right, so make sure that you study pages 213. So at the World War II, the attacks begin. Study all the way to 218 there at the comprehension check for the quiz that is tomorrow. And don't forget to read these 2 pages, 218 and 219. And we'll see you in the next lesson.